We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. We're here talking with Joe Schaefer, discussing illegal immigration at large and specifically how this impacts underage workers and the tragic consequences of that. Now, Joe, in many cases, we assume that these children are entering into a work contract, an agreement with the company, so they're making a decision. Like, obviously loads of 14-year-olds have jobs. I was 13, 14 years old when I started my first job. It wasn't exploitative in any way, though. I didn't feel as exploitative, certainly. But you got the 14-year-olds, they work at Burger King, serving at the till. It's not a dangerous work, but we assume that, for example, people like Duvan Perez, who we discussed in the first segment of this, who died, tragic factory accident. But we assume that they enter into these contracts voluntarily, but that's not always the case. And recently, I think you wrote about this. There's a case in Virginia last year of a cleaning company who, let's say employed for now, but I'm going to whack those air quotes around the word employed, a 13-year-old girl who the prosecutors argued when they brought this case to court that she was forced to work the night shift. This was clearly a case of human trafficking, but still people are turning a blind eye to this, other than enforcing laws that each company has to have an anti-slavery statement on their website or something. Other than that, we're literally witnessing what you would term modern day slavery happening in the factories, and all because of what? Because these companies they're not really facing a penalty. Joe, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that you hit it on the head with those two words, human trafficking. When you hear that phrase, we think of the Mexican cartels, who bring in these people for a fee. We think of sex trafficking. But, human trafficking is big when it comes to labor. We talked about the Mississippi local reporter who talks about these firms actively recruiting in Guatemala and bringing these people into the country and then paying them slave wages to do grueling, difficult, and we now know lethally dangerous labor. That is human trafficking, and they're doing it for a profit, just like the cartels are, just like the sex traffickers are. But because they are large companies, somehow we think that makes it okay. So it goes back to the nature of how work has changed. And this is another point that I think the American people need to think about, is how this diminishes the respect for labor for all of us. It diminishes it for everybody. You talked about having a job, when you were 13, 14. Well, I was 13, 14, 40 years ago. I'm an old man. And, the conditions were a lot different. My first job was with a big supermarket, but they were a local chain, in the state I lived in. Today, you have these multinational corporations. They have no ties to the community. And I call it's the perfect phrase for the deliberate stranger. They don't want to know the people they are hiring, because then you have to treat them like a human being. This is an important quote I'd like to make. Jack Welch, who is the legendary CEO of General Electric, considered this god of modern day capitalism, multinational capitalism, which has caused so many problems, with what we have globalism today. He had this famous quote saying, companies should be put on barges and float down the river. So in case a different country changes their laws so they're unfavorable for the economic conditions of the company, you can just float down the river. So what kind of loyalty to the community is being expressed by that sentiment? It's the deliberate stranger. It's a lack of respect for the people you are employing. And if you think it's going to stop with illegal aliens, look at everything that's happened to the American worker, the capital that they've lost over the last 30 years, less benefits, less wages. You can't support a family on one salary anymore. Again, these things are not isolated incidents. They all go together, and illegal immigration is a big part of it, but it is part of something much bigger.
I want to look at that. So you say that conditions for workers, a lot of people would argue that conditions for workers are much better than they were in the past. But I think that's really missing the point when people make this general analogy, general point that things are better now for workers than they were in the past. They're talking about, the workhouses of 150 years ago, or that they're talking, just on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, where people were essentially slave labor again there. In fact, going back a little further, they actually were. But when you think about maybe mid 1950s, early 1960s, and then you consider what work could do for you then, there was a lot of, what's the word? There was a lot of dignity in having a job and being able to go out and provide for a family on your wage. The white picket fence, home ownership was high, car ownership, all these fancy newfangled gadgets like, an oven, and things were coming into the house. And the wage went a lot further. Now, sure, there's inflation, but there's a lot of economic things happening here, which, again, a lot of them are tied to mass illegal immigration. Because if you have a workforce that's willing to work without regulation, and this is the only time you'll ever hear me say this, without unions to support them in their rights, the only time you'll ever hear me say that, what do you expect? Things are going to get worse. Anyway, we'll be right back with Joe Schaefer, carrying on this very, very important topic after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.